Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another What If. I haven't done one of these in a while, but basically I'm kind of talking about TV shows, kind of wondering what if said show ended up continuing. And for today's episode, I'm going to talk about Carnival Row. What if Carnival Row got a season 3, or just in general, what if it had continued beyond season 2? If you're unaware, Carnival Row recently, well, it's been like, what, maybe 3 weeks maybe at this point in time, since the series finale of, the last 2 episodes of Carnival Row ended up airing. And so I talked a little bit about this in my reviews, but I wanted to kind of talk about more about what it would be like if Carnival Row continued. Now, I read an article because I was so curious about what the writing situation of Carnival Row season 2 was, because it turns out obviously this show was heavily impacted by the pandemic, COVID. So while they were had to halt production and stuff, the team ended up being like, right, let's make this the final season instead. So I don't know if once again if that was kind of more on the creative. It seems like that was on the creative side and not 100% on the Amazon Prime side. I mean, maybe it's a combination of the two, but still, I think it's interesting because. And I should also note, too, this will involve spoilers, so if you have not seen any of the final season of Carnival Row, specifically haven't seen how the series ends, do be warned, I will be touching on some spoilers here, but the world of Carnival Row is so massive, because we've only ever focused on 2 countries in particular. That was the Pac and the Berg. Those are the only ones. So there are so many other countries, because you had like a Grace talking about some of the other places out there in the world. Like, yes, as bad as the Berg is, there are so many other places out there that are so much worse. Obviously, we didn't really get to see a lot of the Fae's, homes. Obviously, we never got to see the Puck's home. I mean, we got the Picts to some extent with Tiernock, but that's about it. So there's so much about that world, there's so much deep lore that could be explored, but it's also that situation where the story revolves around Carnival Row, and you kind of told the story of the row, but obviously there's still more story that could be told. For example, with the aftermath of everything, where everyone kind of ends up. Obviously we see Domby is not now he's become an inspector, and I think he could definitely be someone to kind of help fill that role that Philo no longer wanted to fill anymore, about what... They're no longer going back to being a inspector. So it could be a situation of, like I said, we could see Domby shifting and become someone who becomes an equal opportunist, advocate for the Fae on the row, as well as kind of keeping peace on the row and in the Berg. The political situation being what it was, because you had Philo turned down being the chancellor, so who would actually become the chancellor now, and obviously being someone of the Fae should be, so would that be something that potentially happened in the future? I mean, it'd probably take a very, very long time, and I think that's also the point of it too. We told this story, things are where they are. Yes, there's a little bit of peace, but at the end of the day, that peace might not always last, but the future is always changing little by little, but that change is happening. So you could easily see, yes, maybe decades down the road, you eventually do get a Fae chancellor, or whatever the case may be. There's still conversation of where the Pact is, because we know they were on their back foot because of New Dawn. So are they going to rise back up, considering how much they were diminished? Because obviously they can't do anything, because the Berg is still the powerhouse that they are. Speaking of New Dawn, a lot of those agents kind of disappeared into the crowd. Yes, Leonora is gone, but what she started, this revolution, people now know it. Now people can't, someone else could eventually rise up. So it's that complicated thing of there's still so much story that could be told, but you kind of told this story of the row over these 2 seasons, and how much things have changed, and how so many of the characters we've come to know have changed, like Philo and Vignette, how this journey has changed them, and and for the better, in the long seems of things. And obviously, where everyone kind of ends up, it's just one of those thought theories that just kind of how the story would have continued in a 3rd season or a 4th season. Because I would think you probably would need I think you could, interestingly enough, do a 4-season show with that, in the sense of you've gotten the story you've gotten with the first 2 seasons, and then you get another continuous arc for 3 and 4. Each season will have its own arc, but it'll all be a continuous arc in its own regard. Oh, this is one chunk of an arc, and this is another arc, So I think it would be interesting. I'm also basing that on how season 2 ended, because I'm curious what the original plan for season 2, how that was initially going to play out. I really like the series finale. I know some people, I read something that was calling it a little lackluster. Maybe it's just because it's like, right, it did. I think a lot ended up happening in that series finale. A lot of poignant stuff happened, but maybe it's like, we got there too quickly because they were wrapping a lot of stuff. I mean, this season was like 2 episodes longer than the previous season, so, because I think the original plan was for season 2 to be 8 episodes as well, so who knows what that show, the season 2 would have initially looked like, how many elements stayed the same and how many were completely changed. Is interesting stuff like that to kind of keep in mind. So that's why I have to also think about it from the perspective of, I'm coming from like, hey, the season 2 we got. Who knows what a season 3 or potentially a season 4 would have looked like with the original plans for a season 2 of Carnival Row. But I think it's also an interesting decision to be like, nope, this is going to be the final season. We're telling the story we're going to tell of the Row, and it ends off on a satisfactory note, but there's still so much story that can be told. But the story has always been about the Row, so kind of expanding beyond that, you kind of lose a little bit of the focus that has been the Row, because everything in those stories have had an impact on, you know, the Row, whether it's the New Dawn versus Pat stuff and how much of an impact that was going to have on the Berg and the Row, and even the stuff, you know, in Tiernock and stuff like that, and Philo's past as a soldier, like, all play into like Vignette and Philo's story and how much of an impact it has on them being in the Row and their love story, and that how that ultimately ends up playing out. So that's where I'm at that situation where I'm like, okay, like there's another show I'm going to end up doing another what if about after this, where it kind of has that same thing of like, you told the story you needed to tell, because going beyond that kind of leaves a little bit of the scope, leaves a little bit of the focus of the Row specifically, you know? So I don't know. That's my way of thinking about it. Maybe someone watching this kind of completely disagrees, but that's why I feel like, don't get it wrong, like, you still could, like, if the show had continued, you still could focus on the Row, because everything had such a major, like, once again, the aftermath effects of the Row, and like, once again, how long will this peace stay, and, you know, once again, the New Dawn element of how many of those agents are going to be there causing issues. I mean, we have no idea how much of a time skip happened in this series finale. I got to remember that they say like many moons later, so it could have been like months, maybe even years later, in between like the ending when Philo got shot and then like him, you know, in front of like Parliament, you know, so who knows how much time passed in that frame. So in that time frame, the New Dawn stuff could have happened, and like, yeah, and they're trying to rise up and cause issues, but maybe that got shut down, or maybe they, once again, they're just biding their time and all that. Like I said, there's just a lot that can still be filled in even on that front. So like I said, just kind of like a, you know, a thought piece, I guess you can call this video, of these type of videos that I do with these what ifs. But yeah, those are just kind of my thoughts. Like I said, I'm just kind of reiterating some of the thoughts I had during my review. So I'd love to know, you know, what are your thoughts? Would you have loved to have seen Carnival Row continue for like maybe a 3rd and 4th season, or are you content with the show ending the way it is? Like I said, I'm content with it as well, but I think it'd be pretty dope if it continued, but I'm also perfectly fine with it ending the way it did as well. And once again, like, would your opinion have changed depending on the season 2 we originally would have gotten versus a season 2 that we ended up getting? Because maybe like, hey, if it had ended differently, maybe you would have felt more okay with a 3 and 4, but because of the way it ended, much like me, you're like, hey, I'm perfectly content with this being the end. So, like I said, I'd love to know all your thoughts. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good